Well, you're in the right classroom if you're here to talk about, the Masterclass by Accord on account planning and stakeholder mapping, helping AEs and CSMs run airtight deals. It's 2023, no surprise. Deals are harder than ever. We were getting things through that we probably shouldn't have the last few years, and there's just proven ways of doing this stuff. And we're talking to some tried and true veterans here that are smarter than me in terms of deal execution, and I'm excited to learn a few things and bring to my team here at Accord. And maybe before I keep talking too long, I'll let everyone do a mini intro. But as an icebreaker, so everyone else, this should be a collaborative session. We're joining live and not watching this on YouTube to make this more engaging for everyone. If folk can jump in on the chat and share where you're calling in from and maybe the first thing you've ever sold as your icebreaker. So Ross Rich, CEO and co-founder of Accord. I'm calling in from Toronto, Ontario. And the first thing I ever sold were women's sports bras at a running store. Very awkward 15-year-old Ross doing that. That was the first thing that I ever sold. I'll pass it off to Adir next to introduce himself. Where are you calling in from, and what's the first thing you ever sold, and maybe a bit of history in terms of your sales leadership experience.
Sounds good. Thank you. I have less time than Armand or Matthew to think about something creative as you did, as you talked about. But I'll think about something really quickly. So I'm from New York. I run revenue for Walnut, and I've been in sales the better part of my life. Like, I think ever since I was 15 or 16 years old. And actually the first thing I ever sold, and when I in retrospective, was I used to burn DVDs like of movies and sold them around school, right? I'm like, hey, you want a brand new movie? Highly illegal. So if the FBI is listening, I apologize. But that's the first thing I ever sold. But the one thing I've learned through this is like, how can you utilize the power of like great quality products to bring more audience, right? And grow the business and kind of like understand who's who in the group. So that's my take.
Awesome. We'll see how many illegal first sales that we're doing. I'm seeing a lot of Cutco knives, which I love. I'll pass it over to you, Armand, to introduce yourself next.
Alrighty, well, Adir, you've inspired me because my first sales job was also illegal. So my co-host and I, Nick, at USC football games, we used to be on the USC wrestling team together, and we were co-captains together, and we were really poor. And so we would fundraise for the USC wrestling team. And what we would do is we would buy these gallon jugs of margarita mix from Smart and Final. And then we would get a bunch of ice from one of our team's houses. And we would blend it all together with my mom's blender. And we would roll around hundreds of margaritas at football games, selling $5 for one or $3 for 10. And we sold a lot of margaritas. We had a couple margaritas along the way, and we had a great time. Also highly illegal to do that, but you got to get into sales somehow. So here we are.
Awesome. So yeah, we got burned DVDs, we got margaritas, and Matt, how about yourself?
Armand, I'm impressed you still remember what you sold them for specifically.
Can't remember the numbers.
Impressive memory, nonetheless. Good to see everybody. Thank you again, Ross, for having me join. First thing I sold, I've had time to think about this, and I still feel like my answer is going to be pretty boring relative to some of the others. I had one job growing up before I moved before I joined Salesforce in the early days in Chicago. I caddied for a number of years at a Chicago-based country club. I don't think I sold anything. I mean, I was carrying the bag around the course for 4 hours or 5 hours in the summer heat, but learned how to communicate with some pretty successful people and some pretty some not so great golfers, some great golfers. And first thing I sold, and outside of SaaS, the only thing I've ever sold.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I could go on for a while sharing the background of some of the sales veterans on this call. You might know Armand from 30 Minutes to President's Club. I think one of the best places to go if you're a sales leader or a seller looking to up-level your game in terms of tactical tips and tricks. Definitely check that out. We got Matthew O'Neill of Sprout Social, leading some of the most strategic enterprise deals. And then we got Adir, multi-time early stage, revenue leader, VP of revenue, one of the first hires at Walnut, which you might know of in terms of a great sales and marketing productivity tool. So yeah, I'm here to learn, and hopefully everyone else here picks up a few tips and tricks. I think maybe before getting into, so maybe I'll tease this a little bit. You should have gotten, when you register for the session, a link to download this stakeholder mapping template. If not, I'll share a link to it at the end of the session. Everyone can grab it, and we'll include it in the follow-up as well. We're going to go through how to use this effectively, both yourself as an IC or as a leader. But to kick things off, maybe zooming out for a second, let's talk about, the environment today. What trends are we seeing on the field, and how is it impacting deal execution? And why, maybe specific to this topic, are people obsessed with getting to power, executive alignment, understanding priorities of folks, and getting to the right people? Because I don't think we would have gotten 500 plus people signed up in a week last year if we had this topic. Maybe you're on hiring, or maybe 2 years ago, maybe you're on hiring and how to ramp reps faster. But yeah, maybe we'll go in reverse order. Adir, reverse order with Matthew. Curious to hear why you think this is such a hot topic, and what you're seeing on your team and in the market when it comes to this kind of level of deal execution.
Yeah. Ross, I think good place to jump off from. I think it's a big topic. I think you have so many leaders, and I think this is across every function, not just sales, but CS and marketing and demand gen and elsewhere, that are talking about how so much has changed in 2023. And they'll talk about how there's more stakeholders in deals, there's tighter budgets, there's a need for mutual plans in these deals, there's a need for 8 stakeholders in a deal versus 2. We could probably debate that number today. I'm sure it's different across each of our businesses. I'd maybe invert the advice a little bit for this group, and I think in a way it's a back to basics moment. I think these are all things that really successful sellers, really successful teams have done in past years. And so, when I think about back to basics, it's sellers learning how to prospect again and own the AE pipe gen number, the PG number. I think sellers are seeing a revived importance of needing to multi-thread, needing to sell to more people. I think AEs, leaders, even senior leaders are learning that you have to cost justify a purchase to get it approved again. And I think it's probably incorrectly been branded as a 2023 thing. And I think in a way it's like, kind of back to basics and back to doing the core things that always worked. I'll stop here, and I'll maybe say one more thing, and then I'll pass it off to Adir. I think you also have some bad habits that were created as a result of some of this stuff over the past couple of years, and you have AEs, you have sellers that are needing to unwind some of those habits. But I'd caveat all that by saying I think it can just be a great moment for those that lean in and embrace it, and it can be a tough moment, but also a moment to get better.
Totally.
Adir, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, 100%, right? I think it's basically everyone is going back to the roots, right, of how we should perform a sale and how we should actually talk about the product. And actually, you show that you actually care about the company you're selling to while doing those kind of things. Hey, I want to learn more about people in the organization. But I think also what is triggering this is sellers all of a sudden started looking at their book of business and like, oh, my ACV is going down. 2022, I could easily get X amount of ACV. 2023, my ACV is 20-30% down on average, right? I'll have the audience to share if they see different numbers. Really, I would. But I think that's the average one. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, I actually need to get more people in the organization to see how I can find more use cases, how I can find the right buyers, how I convince the right people to spend more money to get back to my ACV. Or else I'll need to work twice as harder to get the double logos. And we all know, we're all sellers here, right? We don't like to work hard. We like to get those deals in as fast as possible, as quick as possible. But the thing is, all of a sudden we need to find different and creative ways, the right ways to increase ACV. And that's how you get back to basics from my perspective. Armand, I would love to hear your take, Ross.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Matt, you said something that's totally true. This is like the thing that I equate selling in a bull market to is like when COVID was hitting and then like everyone had to take all their meetings from home. Ross is wearing a very nice button up today, but in COVID, what happens is he's wearing his pink elephant pajama pants underneath there, right? From the waist down, Ross is just taking his time. He's feeling good and all that stuff. But eventually, boom, you got to get back into the office. And next thing you know, those jeans don't fit anymore, or those pants don't fit you anymore. And next thing you know, you're like, oh my God, I got to learn how to dress myself again. And that's what's happened with selling is before in the bull market world, top line was the default. So all businesses were defaulting, were being underwritten, and were fundraising to sales multiples. Okay. They were 100% focused on what is your top line? Did you hit your triple, double, double, double? And I was the VP of sales over at Pave, and I was reporting directly to a CEO. And I remember there was a time where I was like trying to negotiate this vendor, and I was taking weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And he was like, dude, move fast, go. Let's use this to go generate 5x the revenue. And then 6 months later, I'm getting killed on CAC payback for something that I wanted to spend $1,000 for, when 6 months prior, I bought a piece of software for $50,000. And so the only thing that has changed are two things. Number one, the way the market is underwriting startups, businesses, stock tickers, whatever, has now shifted from top line to bottom line. Okay. And then number two, the collateral damage that you will suffer as a seller is the people who have the authority to justify a purchase that can impact the bottom line are higher and laterally in different parts of the organization now. And what I mean by that is you need to get higher to justify purchases. And sometimes at Pave, we were selling to HR. HR wasn't getting budget for jack. And so we would always have to thread across to finance versus before finance wasn't involved in any of our deals. So you will have to adapt your multi-threading motion both up and across, when historically in a bull market that might have slowed you down.
I love that point. And I probably focus on the up too much and not the across enough, because that's a really, really great point. Almost harder. Hey, if we're talking about the same language, selling within, an HR team, sales team, whatever it is, selling across is really challenging. Because the people that you're talking to, your champions, might not have the insight into what's going on in other orgs. But to summarize what I heard, and I think this is like the best groundwork before we get into the details of how you go out and act given this world and how you help your sales team execute on better account planning and stakeholder mapping given this, is what I heard. One, we're back to basics. This was always the way, and things maybe got a little out of hand and things got a bit too easy, and we got away from the things that just have worked for the last 100+ years. And now people are refocusing on this. Matt shared, Adir was sharing that, more of a focus on the customer and being a great partner and caring more about their business, which I love. Thinking through more use cases, getting more specific. And I just think that's actually more fun as a seller, to just kind of get passionate about your customer and the use cases. And that's some of the fun of it. And then, yeah, Armand, 2 great points. One around the change from not caring at all about the bottom line, just being about top line growth, to, oh, wow, we have costs as part of the equation for the value of our business, and the impact that it has at the board level and the trickle down, and how that impacts, mid-level managers, upper management, even within an org, might not have the decision-making power. Even the highest person there might go laterally to, say, CFO or even CEO in a lot of cases. So I think really great points of why we should be spending time and helping up-level our team when it comes to getting to the right people, whether that's above or across, and how to do that. Well, enough talking about the high-level stuff. Let's get into the details. Let's talk about, what we're here to talk about, which is stakeholder mapping and account plan. I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get really specific here and share the link to this. If folks want to make a copy in the chat here. And it was funny. The first question that came up, even when we were talking a few moments ago before kicking this off, was, what's the difference? What's the difference between an account plan and a stakeholder map? And honestly, if you asked 4 of us individually, we probably have maybe 4 different answers. But for today, they were going to find it as a stakeholder map is, let's get down to the specifics of the who. Who are the folks that are involved in the deal? How much do they matter in this deal? And what do they care about? And I tried to pare this down. Honestly, you can kind of build this up to 20 plus columns, but your reps are probably not going to follow it. And you're going to get lazy if you're doing it yourself and not going to follow it if you have anything more than this. And an account plan, in my mind, is something that is the next level up. This would be a link in an account plan. So like, how does this business make money? What are their initiatives for this year overall, not just the people there, just the account level stuff versus the stakeholders. Anything that you guys would add in terms of the difference between an account plan and a stakeholder map before we dive in?
Yeah, just to Matt, you go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Armand. Ross, I think you said it well. I would, and we were talking about this right before we went live. I would think about the account plan as a perspective that you formed on the organization and its people. So what does the company do? How does it make money? What have you uncovered in your research of that company, assuming it's a prospect, not a customer of yours today? And that could be through a 10K, it could be attending, listening to earnings calls. It could be research you've done through ChatGPT, through Bard, through various sources that a seller has available to them today. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to hit on. I think the why on this, which is if done well, it should allow you to dictate the terms of the engagement more effectively. I think it's such a miss to be, especially in enterprise selling. And I saw this question come through, and I'll get to it in a moment. But how do you put yourself in a position where you can be proactive in the engagement through that, with that prospect, with that customer, whoever it may be, versus finding yourself in a reactive mode where, who comes to you, the first person your BDR schedules a meeting with is the individual that you're stuck selling to.
Totally. And just to maybe hit on that, because the next session we should do is we should talk about the account plan. I love how you put it. It's not, I think I maybe made it sound too simplistic. It's not just how do they make money and what is this company about? It's your unique perspective as Sprout Social, as 30 MPC, as Walnut, how you see the world, how they see the world, and how you can work together. It needs to be like a very prescriptive, unique way of seeing that. You need to have an opinion about it. And I think that's really, really important. And I think a lot of sellers take a lot of time to develop the confidence to understand that that's the value of working with a great enterprise seller or a market seller, is that opinion, is kind of the unique lens that you have from solving this one unique problem, over and over again. But before we move on, there's an amazing question in here Armand just flagged. Also, folks, if you're chatting in, half the folks are hitting us up just as the hosts and panelists. If you change that to everyone, we can all see the question. But Armand, if you want to hit one of those two questions, I think it's a really good follow on before we get into the stakeholder map here.
Yeah, so Michelle in the chat actually asked a couple of really good questions. They were directed as Matt, so I'm gonna steal the mic for 30 seconds. But Matt and Adir, you guys might have better experience on this than me. But occasionally at Pave, we would sell to these massive private equity backed entities, and what would happen is you'd have one platform co, and the platform co would have all of these like subcos. And every single one of them had their own chain of command, and they were all structured differently. If they had been purchased a long time ago, they would have structures that might mirror the other the other subsidiaries. Versus if they were just acquired, they might still be figuring all that stuff out. So what I find is helpful is I have a very similar stakeholder mapping template that we actually use that looks just like this. And what I would do is I would keep all of the subs and the parent on the same tab, in my opinion. And the reason for that is I want to see how power ladders up across all the subs together. But then what I would do is I would take that row, the purple row with all the headers, and I would basically duplicate that row for every sub so that each sub is its own section. So I can see low power to high power in a sub, power to high power in the next sub. And then at the top, if there's a platform arm or if there's an operating arm, I would keep that at the top. And then that way, what I can do is I can start to check off my path to power at the top of every single sub and see how I can get all these people strung together such that I can have a full platform, full enterprise motion at the top. But Matt and Adir, I'm curious how that might be different if you're dealing with parent sub relationships in a larger sale.
I think similar, Armand. I think it's a really good answer. I like the approach. I think there's so much nuance to this. I think it'll depend on the market that you sell to, the types of buyers. If you sell to SMB versus mid-market versus enterprise, it's going to change. Mary Kate asked this in the Q&A, so I'll hit on this really quick because I think it'll relate to this answer that I give. She asked, how do we approach strategic accounts differently than the larger enterprise segment? So I think this question is specific to Sprout today. So strategic, just for the audience to center on this, is anything in the Fortune 500. So Fortune 500 to Fortune 1, which is Walmart. And so these accounts, almost all of them have a number of subsidiaries. You can imagine the account planning process for Amazon looks very different than you're selling to Pete's Pizza as an SMB. And so we'll see this done in a pretty different way. One thing I'll hit on here, and maybe this is just a theme. I don't know how actionable this is going to be, but we can tie it back to some specifics if we feel like we need to. I think a mistake that I see made is this is looked at as a one-time event when it shouldn't be. Start small, start simple, identify an individual with some influence, build a champion, get somebody into the product, leverage the asset with them, allow them to help you build it out. I think they will typically help you do that. And then I think the question was around how do you actually action the subsidiary, the division in a document like this? I think it could be done through multiple tabs. I think as Armand touched on, it could be done just by kind of duplicating the tab within the sub tab. I don't think there's necessarily a right way and a wrong way to do it. But I'd go back to what I said. I wouldn't expect to have all the answers up front. I actually don't think you should. I think even if you start with minimal information and it's just a jumping off point, it kind of gets back to that like form a perspective, and that perspective should be true across each of the individuals as well. It shouldn't just be true. It shouldn't be true at the company level, right? If you sell a product with a Salesforce integration, there's probably a Salesforce admin that has some level of influence in your deal. What's your point of view on how you engage that individual? Who does that person ladder up to? And can they influence the cycle, the engagement in a really positive direction?
Yeah. I think there's another point, right? When we talk about strategic accounts and when we talk about enterprise accounts, right? Armand mentioned before, hey, in the bull market, some of those things could slow you down. But the question is like, do we actually care, right? Like we need to think about the product we're selling, and if the strategy that we have from an account mapping perspective is land and expand. So I don't care if I'm not covering all the subsidiaries. I don't care if I'm covering all the people, right? I'm trying to target a smaller deal to have a foot in the door, and then the account mapping will help me strategize the growth within the organization itself, right? So we need also, it's like a great game of chess, right? Sometimes you decide to have different moves, although it takes you a step back, but you know it's going to take you a step forward because that's a strategy around what you're trying to do. So I think when at least when I'm approaching a mapping like this, I'm asking myself, what is my target function? Do I want to get a 7-figure deal? Do I want to get the entire group, or do I want to get like a 5-figure deal, a low 6-figure deal, and then to basically expand within the organization itself? That's where it all starts from. I would also say, using the mic here, one thing I like about stakeholder mapping, one thing I add to it is also, an excuse for me being sarcastic here, but what makes those personas like lose their jobs? Well, right. It's not only on the positive, because especially in a market that we're in a bear market, right? We need to ask ourselves, hey, what are they going to lose if they're not going to take action tomorrow morning, right? Like if they have an email, if they weren't on a process with me and decided not to buy, and in a month from now, like shit hits the fan, right? I assume it's PG rated, so shit hits the fan, right? For them, could they lose their job for that? And I think that's a key point to create sense of urgency and to learn the stakeholders within the organization. And then based on this, to answer the questions on the test, you can decide also in the tiers, right? Who is the highest profile person? Who can make this decision? But if he's not going to make this decision, do you mean this person needs to answer to the board, or he has like 3 or 4 hierarchies above him?
Yeah, I mean, so many great points from what I just heard. I think maybe to try to summarize it, if you're trying to keep up with everyone here, I think 2 things worth considering. One, the latest, which is, I think hopefully we all know this, the negative drives deals far more than the positive. I think there's always unlimited positive things you can do to drive the business forward. There's only a subset of things that you can only get wrong and lose your job or miss hugely and be embarrassed. So I think I mean, it's kind of the converse of this, but yeah, thinking through both lenses, and especially with messaging, finding a very delicate way of putting it in the opposite is much more powerful when you're doing sales to drive urgency and to communicate with customers. I think the second thing that I heard there, it kind of makes me feel bad about not having the account plan as well, is it depends what the end in mind is, right? What are we trying to actually accomplish? Again, is it the multi-million-dollar land? Is it the initial, deal, et cetera? And one piece that Matt, you hit on was the priority piece. I think that's why when we launched this, we decided to start with the tier. There's only so many people that you can talk to and that you can make this list endless. Who are the most important people and how can you continue to build this daily? I think that if there was a takeaway for reps out there to tactically change the way they're doing things, or for you to share with your team, it doesn't stop after that first great call. Okay, you finally find this person that sounds like a champion. They share all this information with you, and then you just hone in on it. The best sellers say, okay, great, check mark, there's one. Who are the 2 or 3 other people that are going to feel that good that I'm going to talk to in this organization that are going to bring me forward? Because maybe that person goes on pat leave. Maybe that person gets, involved in a reorg, especially today. Maybe they leave their job. Maybe, whatever happens, you need to constantly be prospecting. And I think a lot of people think about that as an SDR or BDR role. And you're an enterprise seller making, whatever, OTE, you got to constantly be prospecting back into these accounts in the enterprise world to close, 6-figure plus 7-figure plus deals. Cool.
Hey, Ross, maybe just one more point that I would make, maybe even a couple more before we move on. I would just point out for leaders, if you haven't done this, and I saw in the chat or in the poll, there were a number of leaders that hadn't instituted this across their companies. I'd expect the process to be met with resistance because it'll feel like busy work, and it's dangerous. It can also become your fiscal year turns over, you complete it for your top 10 accounts, and then, Q1 is underway and you've moved on. You've moved on to the next initiative. So I'd, my headline there would be, that's good. It's a forcing function for AEs to pause, learn about a company and its people, and form a perspective on it. The last thing I'll hit on this or share on this, and we can move on, Ross, I promise, is I don't think these should be done in a silo. Like if it's just the AE and the leader that has visibility into a document like this, I don't think it's super effective. I'd go as far as, if you sell the big strategic enterprise accounts, it's the AE, it's the leader, it's BDR, it's marketing, it's demand gen to influence ABM efforts. It could be your executive team. It could be your board.
Totally. Yeah, it's across, especially if we're talking about proper enterprise strategic deals. This is across the entire company. Armand, you want to jump in?
If I can just double down on something that both Matt hit on and also what Adir hit on, is what you need to do with this stakeholder map is you need to adapt it to your organization. So this is a frame that is built to be flexible enough such that you can figure out the right people in the right organization at the right time that you need to get in front of. But to Adir's point, if you're at a company like, we'll use Slack as an example, or Notion as an example, your job is to land, boom, consolidate them all, right? That's their sales motion. And your stakeholder map might have 20 different rows where you feel like you can land, and you're trying to spin all these different plates and just land. If you're at a motion like 30 MPC, it's a little bit in the middle, right? Where it's not always a wall to wall. So for example, you might be able to see Adrian on our panel. She runs content for Accord. Adrian is one awesome champion that we would sell to at 30 MPC for a sponsorship. But usually we have both content and demand gen, the two heads of. So the awareness and the tracking of the leads that ultimately turn into revenue. And if we have those 2 points locked up, we can bring those 2 points up to Ross right here. And then for every single account, we basically have 2 golden paths. We can start with an Adrian, and then we can do what we call tidal wave selling, which is we go up high to Ross, and then we topple the demand gen lead. Or if we feel like we don't have enough clout to bring a presentation to Ross only working with Adrian because maybe they don't care about content, which is not the case for Accord, to be clear. What I might do is I might focus on getting Adrian and the Accord demand gen lead in place first, and that's my golden path. So figure out what the golden path is for your organization, and then add that to the stakeholder template, and then just try to repeat that golden path based on what you see for any given target account.
Totally. That's exactly what I think, Adir was kind of getting at with like, what's the end in mind, right? Like, what is that ideal land? Is it this big thing? Is it the small thing for this particular ICP? Hey, for mid-market, we love taking down the entire account. If we're going enterprise and we think that, there's a lot more money, actually counterintuitively, we're going to take a smaller thing, really win that, find 2 or 3 other key people there, then go to CMO. That was a great, super tactical example. Awesome. I think one thing I want to hit on before, because time is flying by right now, and I think we got just over 10 minutes left. Let's talk about, I think we can all agree here, I think the leaders here and most folks listening in, that this stuff is impactful. Here's a template to customize it for your company, blah, blah, blah. How do you actually get folks to do this consistently? I think that's what I see as the biggest question from leaders. And I'd love to hear from folks. I think almost everyone here has been a leader of a sizable team. How have you thought about, getting your team to consistently, not just those top sellers are going to do this anyway or figure it out in their head because they're, genius sellers. How do you think about getting that 50th percentile rep who's at, 80, 90% every quarter to bring in these new skills and strategies and think more strategically on deals? Adir, I'll pass it off to you.
Adir gives a free DVD.
Yeah, 100%, by the way. No one watches DVDs anymore, though. It's a shame. It ruined my business. I'm basically Kodak of the DVDs industry now. No, but seriously speaking, I think, first of all, and Matthew, Armand touched all those points, right? Like, we're dealing with human beings, like AEs, such as ourselves, like we're all human beings. The way I'm thinking about it, oh man, I'm going to bring in more complexity to my deal cycle, right? That's going to be great. It's going to take me more time. It's probably it's like a Schrodinger's cat, right? Like, I don't want to open this box. I don't know what's going on there. I want it as quick as possible. But I think, and then I'm a big believer in that, right? Let's leave it alone, the like enforcement side of things that you can put in. But I think once you show account executives and you take a few accounts and you show them how you adopt those kind of things, and at the end of the day, the result you're getting is not only a quicker sales cycle, it's also a higher ACV, right? You've seen the number, but also a better forecasting. And that's I'm going to get to the example specifically that I've done it with my team, right? A better forecasting, a more accurate forecasting, then they want to adopt it, right? Because the worst thing that could happen to everyone on this call is you're going on a Monday forecast call, right? And you're like, yeah, that's what's going to happen in the next 3 weeks. I'm done. And then 2 weeks after, you're like, yeah, you remember my commit? It's not there anymore. And the main reason is because you just didn't do a good enough job with mapping this account, with stakeholder mapping. And then you all of a sudden find out there's a CFO somewhere, right? In Ohio, I don't know why Ohio, just a random city in the US, and said, no, it's a no-go. I love Ohio, by the way, been there a few times, but just a city, right? It's a no-go. And that's exactly the thing we've done in the forecast meetings. We basically A/B test. Deals we did we basically use stakeholder mapping and account mapping very digitally, and accounts we haven't done anything there, right? And the account executive seen the impact not only on the sheer KPIs they have, but their ability to forecast better on commit deals and have it more accurate, right? So that's one thing that I'm a true believer in, just show the results and have people adopt around those kind of things.
Basically, if we're maybe to translate, you're selling your team, you're running a POC with your team. Hey, you're not ready to buy. Maybe not every single rep on my team is ready to buy stakeholder maps, but I'm going to give half the team this thing, half the team not it, and let's see the outcomes. And the other people that didn't do it and couldn't feel that, that impact are seeing it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Exactly that. And I think because the easiest part is like, hey, we can enforce it. We can enforce gong trackers. We can enforce this on Salesforce. But the problem, and I think that's the most important thing that I can bring on this call, stakeholder mapping is a motion that will help you as an account executive, but it also needs to come from a place that you actually want to do it for the prospect, for the client itself, right? Because it's going to help you understand the client needs. it's going to help you bring a better, more healthier client and the CSM team to better grow it, right? When you have everything in line. So it needs to come from a positive place and not just check a box. And if you check a box, it looks like you checked a box.
100%. I think this is one marker that makes, frankly, a good sales leader versus a bad sales leader. Is a bad sales leader asks their reps to do a bunch of things that if they were in an IC seat, they wouldn't do them. And the whole point of stakeholder mapping is, if I were selling software, especially if I were selling upper mid-market, enterprise and above, right? I'm doing this map every time. And then the way that you can take this a step further is you can build it into your process. So there are 3 places that I would recommend you might choose to build this in your process. So the first is I would always build a lightweight stakeholder map before a first discovery call. And the reason for that is if I'm starting with someone at the line, in my 5-minute drill at the end of that call, I'm always going to be asking to get in front of the next person. And I need to know that beforehand, right? So always come with the stakeholder map in your first discovery call, and that's going to help you get to power faster, right? Number 2, as you're getting to power, the number 1 thing that I would do is take this stakeholder map. And if you're struggling to get to power, bring this to your Adir or Matt of your organization and be like, Adir, I'm trying to break into this enterprise account. Here are the people on the account. Can you send a one-to-one exec to exec email to this person at power? And this is a way to force your VP of sales, your CRO, your CEO to get involved. We would make our CEO send 10 Loom videos at the end of every single day. And we would just be like, these are all the people on the account. This is the top. You go there. I tackle these ones. So it's also a way to team sell. And then the last way is obviously Accord does a bunch of great things associated with joint execution plans, mutual action plans, et cetera. Once you have the stakeholder map, you can literally just turn the stakeholder map into your joint execution plan and put the names that you had on your stakeholder map in your mutual action plan as steps. So it's already work you were going to do anyways, folks. And now you can use this to team sell, to get to power, and to drive your prospects ultimately to a close by identifying these people so you know your story straight and you can teach them how to get their story straight.
So I love that example of the Loom videos. I mean, there's like endless topics to take this. Is like, okay, we've talked about how to identify people, big companies, small companies. It's like, now how do you actually do this? Is it emails? How do you align certain, levels, executive, mid-level, below the line people with people on your company? Like, is it a Loom? Is it, in-person stuff? Is it gifting? Like, there's so many different ways that you can take it. I think the 80-20 here is just starting, like just getting the ball rolling. And like Adir said, having that visceral reaction from your team that says, holy shit, I tried this thing out. I went above early in a deal and this is what it got me. Like, that's how you're going to get your team to adopt it. Maybe final thoughts, as we got 5 minutes here. Matt, how have you thought about, bringing some of this stuff to your team and, having some of those aha moments for reps that might have not been doing this in the past?
Yeah, I think the answers from Armand and Adir were great. There's a few things that come to mind, and maybe some of this is repetitive. Maybe some of it's additive to what's already been shared. I think Adir hit on this, but I would just double down on the importance of coaching the why and not the what on this stuff. And maybe this goes hand in hand. I think you need your top performing sellers to own and embrace it. And the way I would think about operationalizing that is, the first iteration of it, build it with your top seller, build it with a few of your top sellers. They'll also tell you what, if you're wondering what should be included in the account map, they will tell you. The deals they're in will inform that. And you could go further. The reasons you lose those deals will inform, if you find yourself losing because you're selling too low, maybe a sign that this is something that you could operationalize the company or at the company. Armand has hit on this throughout. I think it's a really good point, and I'll just double down on this one. I just think there's room to simplify out of the gates. I always say it's not gymnastics. There's no points for degree of difficulty. You don't need, you don't need to map 200 contacts across Amazon to get started to sell into Amazon. Find 2, and then target those individuals, develop some traction across the company, and again keep it evolving and kind of keep it active throughout the year. I'll wrap this up, Ross, too, by saying I touched on it being an iterative process and one that should continue on throughout the year. I think a good way to hold people accountable to these things is ask to see them. Like I would think of the, show me, don't tell me. If you've mapped one of your tier 1 accounts and you're executing an outbound strategy against it, walk me through it. And don't do it over the phone. Let's pull it up together on Zoom and spend some time collaborating on it together.
Love that. Yeah, no, some good reminders. And honestly, we're trying to become the experts of not just having a platform to do this stuff, but to support leaders in rolling it out. And I think I have some good learnings to share with some of our customers and prospects around, like, yes, you can integrate to Salesforce and build requirement rules and validation rules and all this stuff, but like, hey, how can we get on board the people that are doing this well today to help share those learnings and really champion the sellers on the team that are doing this well, to share with the rest of the team of, this is why Susie is hitting 150% per quarter every quarter, and you're at 90. And yes, you may be working harder than her, but she's just doing these things every time and kind of going from the why. I love that. Well, maybe one last question or two last questions from the audience here. Seen a couple pop into the Q&A. We got one here. What is the best practice for identifying and mapping stakeholders in an organization? What tools are you currently using to identify and map stakeholders in your org? I mean, personally, I'm pulling up LinkedIn, and I know the key personas, and we're looking through that, and I'll do that with my sellers. But any other tools or tips and tricks, obviously outside of Accord, that you guys are using?
I have a very small tool, which I think a lot of people are forgetting. Just ask. You're standing in front of a person, right? And like, you have Zoom info, you have whatever you want, but just ask. I think sometimes people just forget to ask those basic questions, like who's involved? How can we get this done? Who's it important for? Just ask. It's very simple. You're in front of a person.
I love that. Honestly, probably the right answer there. Matt, anything to add?
Similar. LinkedIn, Zoom info. You're gonna have a variety of tools that I think will help you make assumptions. To Adir's point, though, you validate those assumptions with somebody in the company.
Love it. Armand, any final questions that you're seeing that you want to jump in on?
Other questions? No answers associated with this one, but let's see. There's one in the chat that Mary Kate asked, which is, do you have your SDRs involved in your stakeholder mapping? And this is one place where I find that oftentimes the make or break of a great AE is how effectively can you work with your SDR, because they're sort of like your mini-me in a lot of ways. And you can see them as like outsourced task management, which is a really crappy way to see your SDR, or you can see them as like your second brain. And so the way it would usually start is I would sit there and I would map out my accounts with my SDRs at the beginning. And I would be like, hey, I'm going to take first pass on these 5 accounts. Here's how we go from here to here to here. This one, it doesn't make sense because this contact doesn't exist. Here's another path, etc. Here are the next 5. Would you go and map these out for me and bring it back to me? And next thing they know is they're starting to identify pockets that I've missed on my strategic accounts. So step 1 is do it together and own it as the AE. Step 2 is carefully assign homework to your SDR and have them bring it back to you. And then step 3, now you can be like, hey, can I just go focus on selling? And can you bring these account maps to me? Tell me what I'm missing. And my best SDRs were the ones who they'd see my calendar. They would stalk my calendar. They'd be like, hey, Armand, I saw that you got at the line over here. I'm going to go book 3 other meetings with the other department leads while you're working this account. Are you cool with that? I'd be like, hell yeah, every single time. So train your SDRs and teach them how to multi-thread. And that will make them help you not only find more deals, but win more deals by threading across in your active open deals.
Yeah, the future of the SDR function, I think, is in not top of funnel, but actually once you've started a lot of these conversations and investing more in both existing early conversations, existing customers. Love it. Well, we're at time. That flew by. Even more, impactful best practices and tips that I was expecting from this crew. So exceeded my expectations, hopefully out there. Others learned a lot. We're going to share the video recording as well as maybe the top like 5 or 10 things that you can bring to your team and think about and share. But yeah, feel free to grab that stakeholder map, maybe pare it down to start if your team's not doing it today to make it easier. Then yeah, I appreciate everyone tuning in, and especially Adir, Matt, Armand, your time and sharing some of these tips and tricks.
Great time, team. It was a blast.
Thanks for having us, Ross.
Awesome.